Hey everyone, welcome back to the EagleCast. I'm Ditya, and today I'm joined with Kavya today, and we're going to be addressing the issue of women in STEM and how it pertains to different levels of STEM education and a STEM career and the field in general. So hopefully I can kind of talk about how it is relevant to girls in high school and this kind of setting at competitions and other STEM clubs and extracurriculars. And hopefully Claudia can provide insight into what her work experiences looked like, and then her STEM journey thus far. So I'll let her introduce herself in a second. But I don't think I've ever actually been on here, so I'll give a little bit of background. Yeah, so I'm Vidya. I'm a junior board member. I've been on the team for 3 years, and we are currently in the build season for the 2025 game Reefscape. Competition is coming up fast. It's March 8th, and so we are well on our way through getting the robot done, finishing up software, and getting it on there and getting some drive practice in. So looking forward to that. Yeah, so today we're going to be addressing a bunch of different things. So I'll let Kavya kind of talk about her work experience and like how where she's worked and kind of how that pertains to the STEM field. So.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. My name is Kavya. I am a graduate of UNC Charlotte. I graduated in 2022 with my BS in public health and my BS in health systems management. So now I work in, I guess, the general field of public health. I've done a bunch of random things, but I guess right now I'm just a couple weeks away from starting a new position as a policy analyst for the Public Service Commission, which is just a government agency that regulates utility companies to keep them from monopolizing and, overcharging people and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess that's my background.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I guess this kind of ties into the first question. So, how did you hear, or when was the first time you heard the word STEM? If you kind of like think back on that, and then how did you interpret it for that first time, I guess?
Yeah, so I heard the word, I can't even remember when I really heard it for the first time. It was probably like in middle school or something like that. And I mean, it's like an Indian cliche of like the first thing I thought of was being an engineer or a doctor. Like I thought those were not only just like the best ways of doing it, but also like one of the only ways to make a real impact using STEM. I think even now in public health, I don't immediately connect it to STEM because it doesn't fit into that early memory I have of like it being a traditionally science and math heavy dominated field. But I think over time, I have come to realize that public health it relies a lot on like data analysis and technology and biostats and research and all of those things, which are all obviously very much STEM. So I think my early understanding of STEM was just really narrow. And now I think that as I get more work experience and I, just gain a better understanding, I understand that it's a lot broader than I thought. And obviously public health is a really crucial part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so health systems management is definitely a very cool area to work in. And so I'm glad you were kind of like able to explain how all this stuff kind of pertains to you and how it relates to your experience
Yeah.
and where you worked. Yeah. Okay, so kind of like a little bit about you. How did you like have you always wanted to go into public health? I know you mentioned like the the as you're growing up as a young brown girl, I'm sure like you kind of always had this impression of like going into public health. Did you always like were you always drawn to it on your own, or like did your career plans ever deviate from that?
Yeah, it definitely deviated. It's funny that you're asking me this because I just had to think about like how did I get here because I was applying to graduate school a couple months ago. But I think my journey into public health was definitely not a straightforward one of like this is what I always wanted to do and then I went and I did it. I think it evolved over time. I know that growing up, particularly when I was in middle school, that was around the time that like the Sandy Hook school shooting happened and everything. I started noticing like patterns of like inequity and injustice. And so I think that really stuck with me as a kid. And I do remember a lot of people saying, particularly adults saying like, oh, we should really do something about this, or why isn't someone doing something about this? So I always wanted to help people, as cliche as that might sound, but I wanted to do something about it because as a kid, it's like kind of frustrating to not have the tools or the power to actually change things. And so I guess my way of thinking about it, especially since I had been exposed to it by my parents, was STEM. So yeah, I had a pretty narrow understanding of like how to help people using STEM. So going into college at UNC Charlotte, I thought that I wanted to be a doctor. So I was on the pre-med track. I looked into STEM majors that were, related to medical school, and public health was one of those. It just seemed interesting to me when I was like reading all the descriptions online. So I really didn't have a good understanding of it even then, even when I declared it as my major. But I do remember my first foundational public health class being like that turning point for me, because I I had a really good professor. She was a great storyteller, and I just vividly remember her explaining how public health came to be, which I guess I definitely didn't know it, so I guess I'll retell the story as quickly as I can. But basically, when I think it was in like the mid 1800s, there was a physician by the name of John Snow, and he was the one who discovered the source of cholera. So I guess historically they always thought that diseases could only be spread through air. So they called it bad air. And he was the first one to question like whether it was spread through water. So he basically tracked all of the cases of cholera and pinpointed it to a specific water pump. And the reason he did that was because he was getting tired of like treating people. So he kept treating people, but the problem wasn't going away. So what he did instead, was to remove the handle from the water pump, and that was what stopped the outbreak. So I thought that was a really powerful story, and I think that's where I really pivoted because I was sold. What I wanted to do was help people, and if that's the way you can help the most people is to fix broken systems, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So it was definitely not a field that I knew what it was going into it. It was something that I discovered through like learning and stuff like that. But yeah.
I think that's such a refreshing, origin story, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like nowadays so many people are interested in going into public health for a variety of reasons, but it's never like I'm actually so intrigued by how you mentioned like inequity and injustices occurring in that field. I
Mm.
think like as a young like child, like I feel like I like no one really thinks of all of what's wrong in a certain system, and so that's actually so cool that that's what inspired you to kind of get into it. I would love like
Mhm.
for you to touch on that more, like examples of like a broken system or like injustices that may occur often that we don't even realize half the time.
Yeah, I'm thinking the first job that I had that was like traditionally public health, I guess the first job I did have was like a corporation, like a health software corporation, which was technically public health as well because health software is what reduces medical errors and like saves lives and stuff. So that's what I ended up doing at first. But I did end up doing a pivot after that into like actual public health work, not actual, but I guess more traditional public health work after that. So I was working at a nonprofit. It was like an infant mental health nonprofit, and I was a project manager building a statewide mental health consultation program. So I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. I guess it's mental health consultation is interesting because it's not treating the children. It's basically teaching the adults how to guide the children or guide children who are struggling with their mental health or just children in general, honestly, because obviously children go through a lot in like the early stages of their life, and that's kind of what sets them up for the future. Particularly, we were focusing on stopping the school to prison pipeline. So there's basically like this I guess theory, I like concept that when you expel a kid or suspend a kid when they're really young, it gives them this idea of themselves as like a bad person or someone who I just guess just like can't be successful. And that's why they call it the school to prison pipeline, is that when they're suspended, their chances of going to prison later on when they're an adult becomes like it's some crazy number like 10 times or something like that. And so basically our goal was to go into schools and teach or yeah, I guess train and teach teachers how to help children so that it doesn't get to the point of them getting suspended immediately, because that is often what happens. Like we're constantly just trying to be like reactive rather than set people up for success. So I guess that's one example of me trying to fix a broken system, because it is really, really strange that like that is the reaction. Like when a kid is struggling, is to just like kick them out of the school, which then affects their ability to like get into other schools. It even affects their ability to succeed later in life. They can often end up going to prison. And yeah, yeah. So that's one system.
Yeah, that's actually such that's such like a specific issue, I think. Like I feel like that's so like not a lot of people think about that at all. And I think it's so cool that you were able to make a difference in that aspect. I think I brought up the thing about injustices because I feel like a lot of people either neglect to notice that they're there or they just don't even know where to begin looking for them. And I feel
Mhm.
like women in STEM and the issue of underrepresentation is so similar almost.
Mm.
My whole thing about going into this at the very beginning of the season was to, as much as it is important to get girls engaged in STEM early on, I feel like the talk about what they go through and the actual experience of a girl through the STEM field just becomes non-existent. After they get into
Mm.
a STEM curricular, STEM club, no one talks about, the experience after that. And so I wanted to kind of like bring attention to that, but it's also so
Yeah.
difficult because it's one of those injustices that it's just so hard to see, I feel like, for a girl
Hmm.
herself sometimes, and also just to the outside world because it's so like no one, if you're not a girl, you don't really go through it in the same way at all. And so, if you're trying to advocate for
Yeah.
yourself, you're trying to talk about it, it's very it's difficult to begin with, but also like people hearing you out, people understanding what you're talking about, I feel like is so difficult. And so I think, one of the so this being a more hidden injustice, like the
Mhm.
one from the children you were working with, I think it's important to have conversations like these to like raise awareness and bring attention to them. And so I guess that kind of so this kind of goes into like what is the issue of women in STEM like mean to you? I guess like we talked about how you interpret the word STEM. I guess we can kind of talk,
Mhm.
you know, how this is such there's so many layers to this issue. So I feel like where do we even start? But we can talk about like by definition, women in STEM, it's all about underrepresentation. The STEM field has been historically male dominated. And so yeah, if you want to kind of start talking about like what the issue, I guess how would you define it to begin with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even like that issue of like the school to prison pipeline, that's definitely not something I knew about before I even got into public health. Obviously, I was aware of some things, but not everything. And yeah, I think women in STEM is definitely another one of those things. Like I said, my early understanding of STEM was just very narrow, and in many ways, I think that shows like there's a broader issue there. Like even when I was talking to you in the beginning, I was like, am I a woman in STEM? Like I don't know. Like I was
Yeah.
really like hesitant to say that I would do this, but I think that when I was reflecting on that and like preparation for this conversation, I did think about how that highlights who sees themselves as being in STEM. You know what I mean? Um, and how exactly is STEM defined? I guess that's what it makes me think about when I think about women in STEM. Obviously, there's like, we want to have more women in STEM, we want representation and all of that. But I think another part of it is just, yeah, like, how is it defined? Like, who sees themselves as being qualified enough to call themselves STEM? Because I think when it comes to public health, there's like this idea of it as like focused on social issues and it's very community driven and like all these things are true, right? But I think part of that also stems from it being like too soft or too people focused, when in reality, it does have a lot to do with like science and math and technology and all of those things. Like you really couldn't do public health or do impactful work in public health without any of those things. So I do think it's very much a part of STEM. And for so long, STEM has been associated with like, all these rigid structures and to your point of like women in STEM and patriarchal, ideals. And because of that, I think when people think of STEM, they think of these very narrow definitions. And I don't think that's very inclusive, I guess. So yeah, I guess one question that I've been thinking to myself ever since you asked me to do this was just like, why is it when women use STEM to address, human-centered issues, it's sometimes dismissed or seen as like less technical or like less legitimate? And I guess that's why women in STEM matters to me because it's more about it's more than just like getting women into the STEM field. It's also recognizing that there's all these structures in place and they've been here for a really long time. And what are we going to do about that? Like, are we going to make room um, for a diverse group of professionals? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I like the issue doesn't stop just
Hmm.
from when they get in. Like the issue continues far beyond that point, and I feel like that's what not a lot of people talk about. Everyone understands that there's not enough representation, like whatever, whatever. But I feel
Yeah.
like speaking about that experience after the fact of engaging the STEM like club or whatever is something that not enough people like pay attention to. And yeah, I don't know, like addressing, like I almost feel weird saying the issue of women in STEM,
Mhm.
like women in STEM itself, like it's not, there's a label for it. I feel like there's no correct or like specific label that truly encompasses the entirety of the issue. And like
Mhm.
I feel like that kind of pertains to what you were saying, how I was kind of saying there's so many layers to it. It's like the reality is it looks different for every girl in the STEM field. And so it's almost like I feel like it's such a misuse of like an umbrella term, almost like women in STEM, like some people have it better than others and some people have it way worse and some people experience completely different things. So talking about it, I feel like is also very like there's no correct term. And I think it's, I don't know. I just don't like that there's no correct term. You know what I mean? Because again, it's not talked about enough. There's not enough awareness around it. So there's no label for what we go through. And like, there's no way to truly like describe it in the perfect way. So yeah, I definitely see what you're saying when it's, like it's almost dismissed faster because there's no legitimate term for it. It's almost dismissed faster because, you know, it's the women that are bringing it up and it's so niche to women that like,
Mhm.
you know, it's just not as applicable to everyone when this is talked about. Um I kind of want to go into, so I like how you said it was like a human centered issue and not
Mhm.
just specific to really anyone. So what are your thoughts on like people saying that women can't handle certain things in the field, or like I guess this kind of goes into like what is different for women in the STEM field. But so we can kind of talk about a plethora of things in that. But yeah, I kind of want to like, I was talking to my mom about this earlier and she got her degree in mechanical engineering and then she like went into a bunch of other things, I guess. But she was talking about how she would be on the shop floor and like she was told she couldn't weld or she couldn't like work extensive hours on the shop floor because she was a girl and like things like that. So I think there's so many experiences like that. So like and most of them had to do with physical caliber because she was a girl, she couldn't like do some of the heavy duty technical things. And so yeah, like what are your thoughts on that? Or like have you heard anything about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're talking about with like the umbrella terms, I think about that too oftentimes with like modern feminism. I think there is a lack of intersectionality. So I guess just like consideration of like different people's or different parts of people's identity, because obviously like you can be a woman, but there's an added nuance when you're a woman of color, right? Versus like just a woman in STEM. Um, so yeah, it's hard to like really capture that in like one word or like one term, but I guess I'm thinking about my experiences with that as like being a woman and being in like a male dominated space. I
Yeah,
think
I
I'm
just realized I
referring, yeah.
asked you about like shop floors, like yeah, so in
Yeah.
public health and then in your work field. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that my mind automatically goes to like when I was working in corporate and trying to like when I would like write my emails, I'd like write my full email and then I'd go through and then I'd like remove like the exclamation points because I had like put like way too many exclamation points. And I'm like, oh, people are gonna think I'm just like this girl who's like overly eager or whatever, right? And obviously sometimes like it is good to do that because it's like, why do I feel the need to like put an exclamation point to like make it sound like nicer than it is when it's just like period, like I said what I said? Um,
Yeah.
but I think also there is something to be said about like you just are who you are, like sometimes I like to put emojis in my emails and like sometimes I put like an extra exclamation point that like maybe a man wouldn't do. Um, but that doesn't make me like any less qualified to be like doing what I'm doing. Um, yeah, so I think that's like a big part of it. I think it's definitely something that I'm still working on or like practicing. That's really all I could do is just like practice um being myself. And you can take that into like so many different aspects of your life, not just like being a woman or dealing with like working in a STEM field, but yeah, I guess it really just takes practice of being like, oh, wait, I'm doing that thing again. Because these things have been or like these structures, I should say, have been around for like a really long time. So sometimes it can be so difficult to notice them, especially like it's a lot easier to look back and be like, oh yeah, that was kind of weird, rather than like when you're in the moment recognizing it immediately and then like deciding that you're going to be yourself regardless of, the reaction. So yeah, I've definitely had some experiences like that.
Okay, I love how you brought up the email thing. I think that's such like it's something that again people don't like. I feel like that's such a specific example that's so relatable to so many people. I was actually just having this conversation the other day, and I was
Mhm.
genuinely like asking my friend to read over my email because I was like, I feel like this sounds weird. Like, can you like check it over? And
Yeah.
like it was a guy, and he ended up changing all of my exclamation points to periods.
Yeah.
He was like, why are you putting an exclamation point? And it's like I feel like talking about being yourself, there's just something about being in a male dominated environment that just like automatically makes you closed off. I would say like I'm a very outgoing and outspoken person to begin with,
Mhm.
but it's just something about like showing up and proving yourself before you can be yourself is like
Yeah.
such a crazy thing. And it's like I joined robotics, the FRC Roboeagles in my freshman year, and my first year on the team, I was the only girl that showed up to all of the meetings. I
Mhm.
just feel like it wasn't a priority, and a lot of my friends like heads like they just had other things going on, so I would show up and like making friends, like learning things, asking questions, which is all so like surprisingly difficult. Like it was just
Yeah.
like you get in your head, especially, or I got in my head a bunch
Mhm.
about like not being afraid to ask questions, genuinely expressing enthusiasm for what I'm learning and what I want to learn, and like embracing my like what's the word, unqualifiedness, like just
Mhm.
like my lack of knowledge, I guess, like embracing that and be like, well, this is my first year, it's okay. But it's like being in a room with a full of guys that just like look like they know what they're doing all the time, like it's so intimidating. And it's
Yeah.
like you can't help but think that if I was a guy it would be less intimidating, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and so like I like how you mentioned like being yourself is such a conscious decision you have to make all the time, but it's like getting there is like it's a whole thing in its own, I feel like. And
Yeah.
so like once you gain like standing and once you gain kind of like security in yourself, I feel like that's when you start to like make these like realizations that like I don't have to constantly be like second guessing myself or like keeping myself in check or like going over what I do 1,000 times in my head. Like I don't have to overthink it anymore. I don't have to like be super self-conscious.
Yeah,
Um
there's like that hesitation to like speak up oftentimes when you're like the
exactly.
only woman in the room. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
feel like you need to have like all this proof behind like what you're about to say. And I think that's why it's important to like have conversations like this. I think sometimes it can seem like I guess for people maybe who aren't as aware of st about stuff like this, it can seem like maybe negative or like you're dwelling on something. But I do think that like that first step of like recognizing that like, oh, I'm doing this because of XYZ or I'm doing this because of systems outside of my power is really helpful. Honestly, like obviously that's not the only thing. Like there's work to be done after that. There's like practicing of like instead of saying all these like filler words of like, I think maybe, you know what, when you say something that's like
Yeah,
definitely
yeah, yeah,
true
yeah.
and they should definitely do, but you add all these like words around it to soften the blow, that stuff definitely takes practice. But I do think, yeah, that first step is just recognizing where that comes from because it's so easy to internalize it as like, oh, why am I such an unconfident person? Or why can't I just speak up? But obviously, there's a lot of other things at play. And some of that can be intersectionality, like I talked about, because being an Indian woman, there is like an expectation for me to be, I don't know, like soft spoken or like not question authority. Um, yeah, like sometimes I do remember, like even when I was working, there was one time in my life where I worked in a nonprofit that was literally all women. There was not a single man that worked there. And I worked there for like a year. And I thought that when I was, when I got the job, I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be working with all women. There's going to be no issues. Like it's going to be such a fantastic time. But obviously I totally forgot that or I guess I didn't recognize at the time that I was still a minority in like a different way. You know what I
Mm.
mean? That adds like another um, type of expectation. And so I'm imagining if I had been also the only woman, how complicated that would have been and how much I would have hesitated. So yeah.
That's like,
Um,
when does this struggle end? Like, I'm so
yeah.
sorry. But yeah, no, it's definitely it's like I want to say like, oh, it's just getting used to it, it's just getting used to it, but it's like you shouldn't have to get used to it is my point. And it's like if it shouldn't be that hard. Like I definitely get being I'm a minority, it's just inevitable sometimes, like feeling a little awkward for being in a minority, entering like a new environment or whatever is gonna be intimidating, regardless. But like
Mhm.
it should never have to be that hard. Like that's the whole point of this episode or like this conversation, I guess. It's like we're
Mhm.
talking about this because like it shouldn't be this much of an issue. You know what I mean? Like it is definitely,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people understate like what we're even talking about right now. And like, they fail to understand like it's like, okay, whatever, like it's a little hard, just like that sucks and all, but it's like it's not that bad. It can't be that bad. I mean, it's just like it's pretty bad, and it kind of affects like people's motivations, people's mindsets, and that shouldn't happen. I
Yeah,
also
for
like I
sure.
wanted to talk about like being yourself, and then somehow like even when you are yourself and like you feel more qualified and you feel like you finally gain standing in like whatever you're doing, and it's like still not enough. Like how
Mhm.
you like after you are 1000% right and qualified in what you are speaking about, it's like people still second guess you. Like, can we talk
Mhm.
about that a little? Like, I feel like that
Yeah.
is so like aggravating. I'm sure for you and just like in the setting that I'm in, like,
Mhm.
oh, like it's like the proving yourself and having to like prove that you are qualified to be there and that you
Mhm.
deserve to be there. Like that journey never ends. Like that never stops.
Yeah, for
Kind of
sure.
going
I
through.
think, yeah, part of that, like not speaking up is um also, yeah, I think like some of that is like trying to like learn, practice like confrontation. Cause yeah, like as
Mm.
women, we're oftentimes like less confrontational. Like we like let stuff go. And yeah, like even once you are like 1,000% qualified, you can often have imposter syndrome of like, oh, but am I like, second guessing yourself? And yeah, it's definitely practice, like I said, but also just like I'm thinking about how like you feel like sometimes you'll just let stuff go instead of saying, actually, no, I am qualified. And like I'm not saying that when you say, oh, actually, I am qualified, and you give people all the evidence, that they're automatically going to believe you or anything. But I do think that doing that is definitely important for yourself at least. Like I know for myself when I'm in a situation that I'm like 1,000% qualified, I was definitely right, and then someone like bulldozes over me or
Yeah.
dismisses me, something like that. And I just let it go because in the moment I don't want to have confrontation, specifically like if it's in front of like a large group or something like that, or I don't feel like anyone else is gonna have my back or like step in for me. I
Yeah.
know that that's something that I'll like think about for like a long time, like way too long. Like I'll just like think about it and think about it and think about it, and I'll be like, why didn't I say something? Or like it'll just start to like I feel like when you let stuff go like that, I guess specifically I'm thinking about from the perspective as like a woman, like when you let stuff go like that, even though you were right or even though you were qualified, because you're like, oh, it's not a big deal. I do think that it takes a toll on like your perception of yourself and your self-esteem, and then just like perpetuates that cycle of just like consistently letting stuff go. So it's like, yeah, it's that practice of like sometimes when you throw out an idea and then like, let's say like a guy in the group takes credit for it or something like that, you can just call that out. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm obviously making it sound a lot easier than it is because it is really difficult. But once you do it the first time, you're not going to do it perfectly. You're probably not going to, put them in their place and they're not going to agree with you or anything. But it's like, once you do that with the fear, with the fear in your mind as well, like it's not like you're going to be completely confident about it. You'll be more comfortable doing it the second time and then time after that and the time after that. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, that's something that happens a lot is like not feeling like you get credit for what you're doing or just like owning that you do know better in like a certain situation without adding that like extra apology of like, sorry, can we do this differently? It's like, actually, no, I think we need to do this differently because in my experience, XYZ, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that confrontation aspect of it, like it's something I definitely need to kind of work on.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think like whether it's like them taking credit or just like them shooting it down in the first place.
Hmm.
I've been through that a couple times, but it's like standing your ground, just I definitely agree. It gets easier and easier as you like implement it genuinely.
Hmm.
It's just like getting to that point is definitely something that like um might be more difficult. I think also like you mentioned like you know you don't know who's going to stick up for you in that situation. You know who's going to like if I was a guy, finding those allies I feel like would be inherently easier. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
if I was the only girl in a group of guys having discussion about robot design, if I threw out like not such a great idea, if
Hmm.
I did have allies, like then they would be like, yeah, we could adapt, maybe modify this, and this, but I like this, and this, instead of being like,
Hmm.
that just won't work altogether. You know what I mean? There's that difference of like those people that stick up for you, like finding those people is like harder to do because like there's this like feeling of not being good enough in your head, like when you're,
Yeah.
I feel like, um, yeah, and so also like when you do, I wanted to kind of talk about like when you do get to that point, it's like how do you get to that point? I feel like
Hmm.
working twice as hard is the only way you'll ever get there. Like as a girl in this kind of field. Like I remember my mom was saying, like
Hmm.
if you want to excel in like the field of STEM or the engineering, like you're gonna have to know like everything there is to know and be 1000% confident in what you know. Like if
Hmm.
you don't have that, then you're not gonna get far because it's so like you have to constantly be watching out for like who might be watching or like constantly looking to prove yourself. Like you need to be like at the top of your game like all the time to like
Hmm.
receive that recognition or receive that respect. I think that's like that word like respect, like we haven't brought it up too much yet, but like that's like a whole like thing in its own. I think like the backbone of all these issues is like you want respect, and it's like
Hmm.
everyone wants respect, but like gaining that respect as a woman is just like so much harder like than if you're a guy because you're constantly underestimated and like whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think like having to work twice as hard is definitely like a whole nother issue of like um being a woman in the STEM field. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of that starts with I guess self-belief first. Like I feel like that's without that, like you can project as much as you want that other people should respect you, but I think unless like you have this like inherent confidence in yourself as like this is exactly what we should be doing or exactly what I want to be doing, I think it's a lot harder to garner support from other people, I guess, especially people who may not look like you or have the same identity as you. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to think about like how did I like evolve to feel more confident in these spaces? And I think, yeah, it is a lot of like self-work of like, okay, once I feel a certain way and I say something super confidently, other people are much more likely to like get on board because yeah, there is this idea that like as women we need to be twice as good, or like just minorities in general have to be twice as good as the majority to succeed. But another part of that, other than just like self-belief and projecting that self-confidence, is probably just playing to your strengths, I think. Like I said, it was kind of like that email example I was saying, which is like there's this clear standard of like how a professional email should be written, and I'm trying to tailor my emails to be a little bit more corporate, a little bit more like fitting in these structures. But I think one thing that isn't acknowledged enough with like women in STEM is probably just how to play to your strengths. So I think when it comes to that like phrase of like we need to be twice as good or we need to be, X, Y, and Z, there's not enough emphasis on how can we use our strengths as like women, which could be like, I don't know, maybe being a little bit more collaborative in like the work environment or something like that, or like considering the ethical implications of something. There's so many different ways that you can think about it, but there's obviously very unique aspects of being a woman that I think if we just try to, be twice as good as men or like be just like men, I feel like that would just be a disservice to us and just continue to like feed a system that's not very inclusive or like not really working, I guess. But yeah, I guess that's what I think about when I hear like that phrase of like we need to be twice as good is why can't we be good in our own ways, rather than trying to like conform to the way that men operate. Because like obviously men bring, great things to the table, but so do women. And I think that there's ways that we can play to those strengths.
Okay, so you asked like why we should be able to do what we're good at and we should be able to lean into that. I feel like especially when you're kind of like still finding what you are good at, it's almost nerve-wracking to embrace that, you might be more collaborative or you might be more talkative or outgoing because I feel like when you lean into those inherently like female like traits or characteristics, it's like you're almost labeled as like that's all you're good for. And I feel like when I think about like you have to work twice as hard, like the whole thing of like you have to know like 1,000% more than a man to like be treated the same as him. Like I feel like if you don't also lean into technical skills, you risk being viewed as like too you risk being labeled as like that's all you're good at, you know what I mean? That may not be the case at all, but like I feel like as me personally, like when I'm leaning into like being a good like speaker or being collaborative or being artistic or showing off my talents in that aspect, like I'm almost like I'm scared to be thought of as like, well, she can't do mechanical or she can't do electrical or she can't apply herself anywhere else, which is not the case, shouldn't be the case at all. And it's not when you do it in the right way and you show how resourceful you can be in different aspects. But yeah, I almost like I just when you said that I thought of like myself like leaning away from like being more artistic or working on a presentation board and more like putting stats into the presentation like script or like working on the robot more than working on media or working on things like that and like
Mhm.
picking and choosing what I want to do because I'm more worried about other people's perception of me than myself because I know you've talked about like every single time you let someone best you or you let your own like self-confidence kind of go out the window, like you're
Mhm.
hurting your own image of yourself and your own like perception of who you are. I definitely that's again something that I definitely struggle with where I care more about like I let my definition of who I am and my perception of who I am, I let that depend way too much on what other people think of me and like
Yeah.
what other people see me as. So yeah. Um and I guess that kind of leads into my thing about like where do you draw the line? Like when we're talking about how people see you and how people perceive you, it's like if I were to talk to a guy about this, like one of my friends on the team,
Mhm.
they probably wouldn't know any of this was going on in my head. And it's
Mhm.
like if I was explaining this to them, it's like, well, oh well, I didn't mean to do that. Like I didn't mean to make you feel that way. And it's like, yeah, you never do. But like,
Mhm.
obviously we're here and I'm talking about it. So it's like I almost like I end up, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I would end up giving them the benefit of the doubt. And it's like the conversation around like, okay, but are you being dramatic? Are you
Mhm.
being a little like are you overreacting with like yeah, you're a girl, but does it really affect your position on the team that much? And it's
Mhm.
like where do you draw the line between like victimizing yourself, quote
Mhm.
unquote victimizing yourself, and where do you draw the line between like, no, this is real and this is happening because I'm a girl?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, when you're talking about that example, I was thinking about how it's not really an us versus them thing. Because like oftentimes when you call something out like that, it can seem like that. It's like a me versus you, when in reality, like the patriarchy or these biases and things that are internalized by men are also internalized by women, right? So it's not just like, oh, like men are doing this to me. I have also like internalized a lot of these things and like placed all these like boundaries on myself. So it's almost like a double-edged sword, I guess. But yeah, I do think there is a line when it comes to like being a victim of something versus like actually owning that. And it's so easy. I think it's so easy, especially like during this time, I guess, to get lost in like the negative aspects of like history and systems and like the way they're set up for people to fail and blah, blah, blah. Especially as someone in public health, I think about that all the time and I can get really defeated like in my work. But I think, part of that starts with like acknowledging like the feelings that come up with that. Like when you're thinking about all these like negative things and feeling like a victim and like feeling like there's nothing you can do and not wanting to come off like that. And like sometimes you can come off like that because you have so many feelings of like anger and like resentment towards this person for like treating you the way that they did, that can like come out and then you end up having like a super like unproductive conversation. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think acknowledging those feelings is really the first step. I think pretending that like it doesn't affect you, but then trying to say something about it casually, like that kind of stuff, like I don't think that that's really productive, I guess. It's just like not the best way of doing things. I find it easier to just like allow myself to be angry about something and to feel like um feel like a little bit of like a victim and feel like, oh, why did this happen to me and blah 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 and like have my little tantrum by myself and like process that before I actually go and like do something about it and like talk about it because I do think that that's natural. I just think that it's not natural or helpful to yourself, honestly, to just like sit in that place and stay in that place. So there's a line there. I think there does need to be some action after processing those feelings. And some of that, like processing, I guess, can, like we said before, just connecting with other people who have had that experience. Even if it's not just like women, even if it's not like there's another woman on your team that you can talk to about like this experience you had at robotics, it could even just be like another person who maybe is a minority. That's like a experience that they could probably relate to, maybe not in the exact same way as like you being a woman, but in some way that they probably can. And so finding community in that way is really important. But I think when it comes to calling stuff up and not feeling like a victim, I think it really goes back to that point of like we do bring a lot to the table and finding out exactly what that is, whether that's like in a leadership way, that can be in a problem solving way, because technical skills are still really important. It's just that different people have different approaches to it, and that's obviously colored by your identity. You know what I mean? And so finding value in that and owning like your personal power of like, what can I do in a situation is really important. I think we've seen it like over history so many times over and over again is like people just owning their personal power, even though, systems of oppression, like I'm thinking like my mind automatically goes to like slavery, like a lot of people really owned their personal power in those situations even though everything around them was telling them that they had no power and that there was nothing they could do about it. And even me, like looking back at that, I'm like, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. And obviously, this is like a smaller scale, but I think that same lesson comes into play here of like you have power yourself, I guess, to not be a victim and to do something about it. And if you just give that up, there's not going to be any change, not just for you, but like also the people that come after you, you know? So, yeah.
That's Yeah, definitely something like that's super important to think about. It's almost like it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the issue is a lot of the time. Like I love the fact that you mentioned like leaning into that like moment of like anger and moment of like sheer emotion almost. Like
Hmm.
I'm definitely the type of person to like overthink a scenario and then kind of like really go through it in my head like after the fact and
Hmm.
kind of like process exactly what happened, how I feel about it, and like how I intend to kind of like bring it up if that's what the situation requires. But it's like almost if we are talking about ingrained misogyny and ingrained like patriarchal values, it's almost like they're almost 1,000% of the time not evident like or not obvious, and it's like now especially like nowadays like it's not going to be as obvious as it ever was
Hmm.
to call out so easily, and it's like I guess that's where that question kind of stemmed from. It was like well, is he really being like that because I'm a girl, or is it because like or am I just like am I really just not good enough for the position, or I guess
Hmm.
that's what the situation is. And it's like when you do like need to bring it up and like need to like exactly pinpoint like what it is that caused this event to happen, you have to look at like like what their perception of you might be, and you don't know if that stems from like the fact they're a girl or like the fact that they have an objective opinion of you that you just don't like. And
Yeah,
so I
that's true.
also
I think,
yeah.
yeah, I guess I'm thinking about those times where I would feel confused of like, why are they treating me a certain way? And a lot of times I think asking questions is really helpful, like coming at it from like a curious standpoint,
Mhm.
because especially when you're coming at it from like a perspective of curiosity, like I'm trying to understand you, right? That is a way to get a more open response from people rather than being like, you did this and you meant this by doing this. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Maybe even just making it a conversation or just asking a question of like, why did you say that? Or like, why did you say that to me particularly? Or why did you think that, I don't know, this idea from me was not that great versus this one? You know what I mean? Like those kinds of questions, I feel like it can often sometimes it can even lead someone to the answer themselves of being like, oh yeah, you're right, that was unfair to you, like I'm sorry, rather than giving them the answers themselves, because oftentimes when you make like blanket statements or just like statements to someone of like what they meant and um the underlying like sexism behind it or whatever, I feel like that can definitely shut people down. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think this falls into the fact that you were talking about like it's all in or nothing confrontation when you're talking about confrontation, kind of like skating past the point or like beating around the bush when you're talking about like how something hurt you. Like I feel like especially when you're talking about things like sexism or like ingrained misogyny, like that's so useless, and you will never like they're never going to admit why they did what they did if you can't get to the point and can't like propose a reason for why they might have acted that way. So yeah, I definitely agree. Like just start like definitely stand your ground and ask questions about why that might have occurred. I think like just like not getting defeated in the moment is like
Mhm.
really what I kind of deal with, I guess, in my head. Like it's almost like not taking what they say at face value. Like if you're getting evaluated for a position, it's like they could come up with 1,000 reasons for why you're not qualified, and like instead of like taking that at face value, like okay, well, I'm just never gonna get it because clearly I don't seem to be good enough, like maybe like I definitely think it's important to press and like make sure you understand exactly where all this is coming from, um
Mhm.
instead of just like accepting it and taking it and feeling discouraged, which is
Yeah.
also something I guess we can talk about. Like I feel like I don't know if this is like happens to a lot of people, but I definitely feel like I feel like my fear of failure is definitely exacerbated
Mm.
when robotics or when I'm going out for a position related to robotics. And when I don't like when I do fail or when I don't get that position, like the feelings of defeat or the feelings of failure, feelings of like just like discouragement, I guess, are extremely like are just blown out of proportion. I don't know what it is about robotics in general, but I feel like in anything else that I do, I'm pretty good at like picking myself back up and just like figuring out my faults and just trying again because I don't like get that affected. But something about like putting so much of myself into what I do at robotics and then not
Mhm.
seeing the results I want to see, like is just so like it dawns on me so intensely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if you can relate to that in
Yeah, for
with
sure. Yeah, and that's what that practice thing I was saying was like you're never I know that when I was younger and I would say something and I wouldn't stand up for myself enough, I'd be like, oh, like I failed, like, that kind of stuff. Or like I would try for an opportunity that, maybe I knew that I wasn't going to have a very good shot at, and then not getting it, I would, feel defeated. I mean, this is like so much easier said than done. So take this with a grain of salt. But when you were saying that, I was thinking about how I try and frame things as like a learning opportunity and not just like a learning opportunity, but one of many learning opportunities. So like when I interviewed for a position and I didn't get it, I had to like take a moment. Obviously, I had to let myself be disappointed for some time, but also just taking a moment to like recognize that that was a learning opportunity and it's not the last one I'm going to have. There's definitely going to be so many more because obviously you're young, but also like I have to sometimes remind myself that I'm also very young and still learning. So yeah, I mean, it just like I'm saying this and it just feels so simple when I'm saying it out loud, but like in
yeah.
reality, yeah, it's definitely such a like mindset shift to like shift from like perfectionism to a growth mindset of like this is a learning opportunity and I'm gonna ask questions, figure out what I can do to be better from here and then try again. Not to say that like trying again you're gonna get it perfectly or that, that second time around everything's gonna work out, but you're like one step closer to where you want to be because if you didn't take that step and then fail, you would be one step behind, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, no, for sure. I think this also falls into what you were saying with like imposter syndrome and like
mhm.
almost being like, that perfectionism mindset and having to like get it right the first time or get it right like efficiently and just like perfectly like without asking for help.
Yeah.
Like the need to like do it all yourself, like those kind of things. Like yeah. If it doesn't work out that way, like I feel like being okay with it being a learning opportunity is definitely like you said, it just takes practice and like it just like takes like a shift in your mindset to really like embrace it. I think embracing it's like all what it's about. I think it's like if you're not okay with, you know, becoming like it's like becoming a better version of yourself has to do with like a difficult experience, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it stems from that. And I feel like being okay with those like experiences from time to time, especially in this field, and especially because you are from a minority, I think is so crucial to like
Yeah, for sure.
really like
Self-perception
yeah.
definitely colors everything, like the way that you see yourself, like who you are, what your level of confidence is. All of that stuff is definitely projected onto other people, or at least I guess I should say people will um act according to that, I guess. And like I was saying of like calling something out like that first time it won't feel good and it probably won't feel good like the four other times after that, but once the fifth time you do that, your brain, even if you struggle with like self-talk or like, telling yourself positive things, I feel like that can feel a little bit delusional sometimes of being like, yeah, I'm good enough, and then you don't
Oh
actually feel
yeah.
that way. But it's like when it comes to action, like once you do it five times, then you start to build this, your brain starts to recognize like, oh, I can deal with confrontation. Like I can survive confrontation and I'm capable of doing it. Maybe not perfectly, but I have the capacity for it. And then you kind of like change how you see yourself, and that oftentimes just automatically changes the way other people see you. So yeah, when it comes to opportunities too, it's like when you go for opportunities over and over again, even if you fail, you'll start to see yourself as someone that's like capable of doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think everything with this conversation and like women in STEM boils down to like self-assurance and kind of like you know like you're right, like it's cheesy to say believing in yourself, but like
Mhm.
genuinely like knowing like you will get there and you can get there, and even if you don't get to the first time, like being okay with having that journey of like successes and failures alike is really big for like achieving your goals and attaining that position of where you want to be in life. um
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely like everything comes back to like just trusting kind of, and like, taking a back seat and like not trying to be in control of everything all the time.
Hmm.
Especially with this fear of failure and with this like having to work twice as hard or be as good or proving yourself and all that. Like I think it
Yeah.
if you I think if you focus on like the rewarding aspects and be like, and I feel like coming back to why you're even doing what you're doing in the first place and why you're in
Hmm.
STEM or why you're in the field of work that you want to be in, like
Yeah.
focusing on what you get from it overall. I think I get so bogged down with I come home ranting every day, well, this happened. It's like
Hmm.
that I enjoyed being there and I truly did immerse myself in the work that I'm interested
Yeah.
in, and that's such a privilege. And so I think it really does like um all depend on your mindset, which is an incredible thing. I
Yeah,
think
for sure.
it would be, I think you mentioned this earlier, but it's also like setting the example for younger girls. A big part of our
Hmm.
team is like doing outreach, going to elementary schools, showing younger generations what they could be doing when they're older.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely one of the most rewarding aspects. Like, I was a super inquisitive learner when I was younger, and so it's just so like heartwarming to see so many people interested in this kind of stuff from a super
Hmm.
early age, and like giving them the resources and things is just something that I know a lot of our members absolutely love to do. And so like I would love to kind of finish off the episode by talking about these kind of conversations and just like raising awareness about this, like what kind of impact does that truly have on upcoming generations of younger girls, and how like why this is really important to speak about, and why unaffected groups should even care about women in STEM.
Yeah. Obviously representation makes a difference, seeing people do things that maybe you didn't think women could do or women of color could do is very, I think it's very important to like, I'm not saying that representation is everything, but it changes your worldview of like what's possible, right? Like especially as a young kid. So I think that's part of it. I think there's a lot of discussion about that. I also think that by, you know, doing, I guess in this example, it's like being in robotics as a woman, or for me, being a woman in sometimes, or a woman of color specifically in fields where maybe I'm a minority or spaces, I think doing that definitely builds resources and like clears barriers for people who might come after me. And sometimes like you know how you were saying like focusing on the positive, sometimes when you can't like focus on something super tangible of like I accomplished this one thing today, I think that's something that maybe that makes people feel good, is like you're clearing the way for like the people who will come after you. And I think that's incredibly important and really hard to just like quantify, but it is definitely a thing, like this
Yeah.
kind of stuff like affects generations, and obviously like the generations before us did stuff so that we could do stuff. So I think that's why it is so important. But yeah, I think another reason why I would say I guess it's important to talk about stuff like this is just making room for different voices and like different ideas. And I don't even think that just has to do with women, but just different ways of like thinking about STEM. Like I think that's really important. Like that's really where innovation comes from.
Mhm.
And historically, that's always obviously been like men trying to think about things differently. But when you have people who look different or come from different backgrounds at the table, I think that that can facilitate a lot of innovation in a way that we don't even know the full extent to which is possible, because we're still in like the early stages of like it being normalized that like women are in STEM.
Yeah, I definitely love how you use the word innovation. I feel like at its core, innovation is like creativity and imagination. And it like, it ties in the fact that like the imaginative parts of us like start when we're super young. And so it's like reaching out to those younger audiences is key to fostering innovation for, older generations, or just the workforce in general for when those younger generations grow up and they are able to really hone in those skills that they've, developed
Mhm.
over course of many years. Um, and then also just like bringing new ideas to the table is definitely like the best way to really reach that goal of coming up with more creative solutions to issues in the world. And it's just like um like the workforce benefits from like having a variety of opinions and
Mhm.
like ideas as well. And I think that like perfectly goes into what you were saying about like leaning into your more feminine like skills, or
Mhm.
even just like characteristics that you might just like have because you're like being collaborative, being more artistic, like being more whatever. All of that ties into adding diversity into the workplace, and I think that's so important to consider because that is what directly like promotes innovation and fosters innovation in today's world. And so I think that's definitely super important for where we're trying to go with the engineering field and technology and everything that's happening in today's world. So I think talking about this is definitely important to everyone, like even if
Yeah.
you are directly affected by this. I think just like recognizing it and making room for these new ideas and making room for these people that come from a variety of different backgrounds is crucial for progress and
Yeah, for
like
sure. I think that is the end goal, right? Is so that, you know, future generations don't have to come into STEM and feel like, oh, I need to be just like this man. I need to like emulate how he acts and how he works and how he thinks and stuff like that. And I do think that that stifles a lot of innovation and progress. And yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that was everything that I had. But yeah, I think this was such a joy to do with you. Thank you so much for coming on here and
Yeah.
kind of taking the time to talk about all this. Yeah, this was so much fun. I think we definitely covered so many important things. And I'm glad we got the opportunity to kind of reach a wider platform about all this. So yeah, thanks so
Yeah.
much for coming on here.
Yeah, of course. I had a lot of fun. This is the kind of stuff I think about in my free time too. So, it's really cool to be able to like, I guess like articulate that and, share that with a wider audience. So.